CT169Strong proudly presents What's at Stake? Affordable Housing Zoning 8-30G Bills, currently before the Connecticut General Assembly. Alexis Harrison moderates, with Maria Weingarten, Francis Pickering, Jeff Gordon, and Catherine Braun.
Good evening. My name is Alexis Harrison. For those who don't know me, I'm part of CT169Strong, and welcome to our conversation on the 2024 legislative session. Our group, CT169Strong, continues to be the boots on the ground when it comes to delivering information on the zoning and housing bills, and appreciate your consideration and time tonight. Tonight's panel includes, we have Francis Pickering, who's the Executive Director of WestCog. We have Maria Weingarten, co-founder of CT169Strong. Catherine Braun, she's an environmental lawyer as well as a commissioner on the Fairfield P&Z. So welcome all of you. And Jeff Gordon will log on when he's available to do so. He's a state senator. Maria, I am going to go to you first. I'd love for you to give us the 10,000-foot view of what's going on this session.
Okay, well, so we have another hearing coming up this Wednesday, I guess is the most immediate information, the 13th, and that hearing has about 4 bills, I think, that we're concerned about. So if anyone is interested, all of those bills will be on our website, and you could read our thoughts on some of those bills, and we'll be talking about some of that today. But those are the ones we're looking at for this week. Right now, we're sort of in the middle of process here where bills have gotten hearings. Some of them have been revised with language, and they have a JFS, which is a joint favorable substitute language. And they are now in a hold pattern waiting to potentially go to all of the House and Senate to be voted on. So we're looking at about 12 to 14 bills right now. We don't know if all of them will be going to the floor, but we are tracking about 12 or 14 bills that are of concern to us. And there are some issues that we keep seeing. And I'll just mention a couple of them real quickly. One of them is this as of right development seems to sneak in more than, I would say, at least 25 to maybe even 40% of the bills. There's one form or another where they're trying to take away local zoning control, whether it's inland wetland review, whether it's just trying to speed a process through, whether it's a punitive measure against towns if they're not doing something or don't have a high enough point score on a system. So that's one of the things that they're very motivated to get involved with. Another thing we've seen on a couple of bills is housing authority jurisdiction. And this received a couple of hearings in the Housing Committee. One was on SB 6. In that bill, the housing authority would have to get permission from the other housing authority that it might want to build in before it can go and develop in another community. But there is another bill that's still alive that's gone out of committee that still has that housing authority jurisdiction where any housing authority anywhere can go and build in another community without asking their permission. So that is a concern to us, again, about a loss of local control. So I think those are maybe the hot button issues in my mind. Maybe others have some other ideas, but those are the ones that kind of keep me up and thinking about how we can do better and try to block some of these bills that take away local decision making.
No, appreciate that high level summary. No, we are tracking a lot. Seems like more than ever. And maybe you could just give us a snapshot of what happened last session, where we are. I know this is what they call the short session. So maybe you can just give us a snapshot of last year too.
So last year there were a number of bills that came around, and I guess the most concerning to all of us was the fair share bill that was passed. It passed out of the House at 2 a.m. in the morning, and it was sold as a study, not as a real bill. That was, so it was a bill that is meant to do to make an analysis of what the entire need of affordable housing is in the entire state, and then assign it regionally and then further drill down to assign a specific fair share to every single municipality aside from the poverty cities. And and what it decided was conveniently that those numbers would not be determined until December, which is after this election cycle. So it's been a little bit silent on fair share this year, but we know that there are a couple of bills that we've seen where they've referred to fair share language. One of the bills has taken the fair share language out, and in another bill, it still refers to a regional plan of fair share. And so it's still alive, and we're still very concerned about it. And we do feel that fair share is the biggest concern we have, because if you didn't like 830G, fair share is roughly going to, require about a 20% affordability number for many communities. And that's a very high burden, and we have not even seen what sort of punitive measures might be attached to that once they've phase 2, which would be in next session. Obviously, they don't want to do it in an election year, but phase 2 would be looking at punitive measures to potentially remove all zoning if you don't comply within a certain number of years to have all the units built that you wanted to have built. So we still have some of that information on our CT169 Strong Facebook page on, website, CT169Strong.org. If you go there and you scroll down on the main page, you will find information on fair share and the bill and what passed and what we've seen in the prior years and what we could likely expect to see next year from this bill.
Great. Thanks, Maria. Over to Frances. Maybe you could talk about some of the bills that you find concerning, as well as the ones that are actually very positive and things that we should look at. Not everything is bad, and I'd love for you just to give both views if they're
Sure. Thanks, Maria and Alexis. So every year we review the bill and submit testimony on behalf of the COG. And if I were to probably say the one bill that concerns me most of all is House Bill 5336. It is a relatively innocuous looking bill until you get to the very end. And there is substitute language out there, but essentially it sneaks fair share into state law. So for those who aren't familiar, fair share is a very top-down approach to development. It's not market-driven, and it presumes the state can determine how many housing units are needed in every municipality, at how many bedrooms, at what price points, at what age of the residents, really omniscient. And then if a municipality does not, if developers don't build it, then a municipality is on the hook to build it at their own expense. And our estimates were, if a municipality had to subsidize these by around 50%, $20 to $30 billion in funding the taxpayers would have to come up with statewide. So really massive, massive increase in costs. And in many municipalities in the state, there may be no demand for this housing. We know that Southwestern Connecticut, there is pressure for development, but much of the state, we've seen stagnant or shrinking population. So House Bill 5336, last year, fair share was put in as a study to come back to the legislature for review, to look at what the proposed allocations for municipalities are. The study has not been completed. The legislature hasn't seen it, and the legislature has not enacted fair share, right? It's just a concept. 5336 actually would require the Department of Housing to break the low-income housing tax credit into 169 separate pools, one for each municipality, and allocate those proportional to what the fair share allocations are. And so I'm concerned about that because essentially it's putting fair share into statute even before the legislature has decided to go along with it. The side effect would be that we break the low-income housing tax credit, which is highly prized by developers and oversubscribed, because the credits right now that are used to build affordable housing in places where it's needed would be splintered 169 ways, and we'd probably end up stranding those credits. So that's a bad bill from local control. It's also bad from the perspective of affordable housing. It just, I don't see anything redeeming to that bill, and hopefully that will die. So 5336. We have seen a lot of conversation about 5390, which is the so-called desegregate bill. It's come back from last year. It has really It's been defanged in large part, but I am concerned about it because although it is an opt-in and although it doesn't actually bar municipalities from getting state aid, it would essentially deprioritize them if municipalities do not do what the bill says. And it's very similar to what was adopted last year by the General Assembly, proposed by the governor's office, MRDA, the Municipal Redevelopment Authority. I think MRDA is a superior model because it's based on the Capital Region Development Authority, where you actually have a quasi-governmental entity that can develop. Its only goal is to develop, and it would be invited in by municipalities. So it's all voluntary. My concern here is that the legislature, if it adopts the desegregate bill, we're going to have two battling, very similar approaches, and it's just going to gum up the system, and neither of them will actually get up and running. And then municipalities will be faulted for the state being unable to set up a workable framework. You know, if we're going to do something, let's do it once, let's do it right. Let's not create more and more redundant statutes and then get stuck trying to implement them. A couple other ones, 5391 is a bill that would enable municipalities to get an exemption from 830G if they basically adopted all these very micromanaging specifications in their zoning. So if you give up a lot of your local control, you'll be exempt from 830G. If you don't do these, then you're also going to lose local control. You'll have minimum lot sizes of 7,500 square feet in areas with water and sewer, 1 acre with no water and sewer. So smaller than what the public health code require. You're going to put municipalities in a very hard position where they're having to juggle complying with state law and complying with public health code. And they'd also have to have by right development in areas with public water and sewer. So I think that was more of a concept bill. I don't think 5391 is going to go anywhere. It's been opposed by housing advocates as well, but it was concerning. The last one that I found concerning was 5174, which would provide for temporary housing shelters at churches to address the challenges we've seen with homelessness and international migrants. I think the bill probably is unconstitutional because you cannot allow a church to put up housing and tell a nonprofit or another property owner you can't do that. You can limit religious uses to religious institutions, but you can't limit residential. So this would really open the floodgates to any property owner putting a small trailer park up to 8 trailers on a property of any size. Regardless of whether there is water or sewer, without provision for parking, without provision for garbage collection, without provision for sanitation. Really a scary bill. Probably it won't go anywhere because it is so concerning from a public health perspective, but you never know. On good bills, Senate Bill 6 is supported by 18 of 24 of the majority members of the Senate. We were very opposed to it because it had a unilateral expansion of housing authorities, which makes no sense at all. Municipalities can and do work together, but a housing authority is essentially a municipal department. We shouldn't have towns willy-nilly expanding into each other's territory. If towns are going to work together, they need to share the management structure and financially support what they're doing and not just build empires. That's not a good use of public funds, and it's not democratically accountable. That's been changed in Senate Bill 6 so that housing authority expansion would have to be mutually acceptable. So with that change, I think the bill's got a lot of very innovative concepts to address housing costs and provide more flexibility. That's a good bill. We have a range of other positive bills. Senate Bill 267 is a study of the impact of Airbnb and Verbos on the rental market. 269 would reduce the sales tax on building supplies for multifamily housing. 270 would provide credits for converting residential space, underutilized offices, and shopping facilities, malls, to housing. 5337 would allow municipalities to use TIF districts voluntarily to extend deed restrictions so we don't lose properties that are already affordable. And there's a range of additional bills. There are a lot of very good bills this year. So I'm glad to say there are more bills to support than bills to oppose, but there still are some eye openers out there.
Yeah, that's good news. And just to go follow up on the Desegregate Connecticut bill, the TOD bill. TOD is great. I think most of us agree on that. Just my example is, I live in Fairfield, and we've built out TOD significantly in the last 5 years. We've been doing that work. We've gotten brownfield grants. And now, as I interpret the desegregate bill, if we don't opt in because we are doing the work, would we be penalized with steep grants and funding? Is that correct?
That's the question. Is being deprioritized mean? So here's the big problem, right? Most of these funds that are handed out by the state, they have various ways they hand them out. Steve, for instance, often is political. Clean water funding is based upon bona fide public health and environmental concerns. I don't know. There's been a lot of talk by housing advocates. I think we're all housing advocates here. We all live in a home and we all support more housing. There's been a lot of talk about finding additional funding for housing, and they're going to be, brand new presents under the Christmas tree. If we're looking at what the governor's saying, there is no new money out there. So deprioritization, in my view, would cost municipalities that don't make these specific changes to their zoning regulations. And it's not performance-based, right? It's all process-based. That's the problem here. If your municipality is building a lot of housing because there's development interest and you're working with developers, but you don't meet those specific process standards in your zoning regulations, it doesn't matter how many units you build. That's, I think that the proof is in the pudding here, and the desegregate bill is very much focused on process, and that doesn't always work.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Appreciate the follow-up. I want to move along to Catherine. Kathy, I know you speak a lot about the environment. You've testified a few times this session and past sessions as well. What are, as an environmentalist, and I know you go look at, things through that lens a lot, what concerns you the most?
Okay, so it's alarming, actually, looking at a number of these bills. It's almost like somebody said, we're so desperate to add development that we're just going to say we have to disband with the environment. It's quite alarming to me. So there's so many bills, and it's confusing because there's so many bills. Honestly, if somebody wants to write a letter supporting the environment, talk about concepts, maybe list all the bills and say, if a bill has this in it, please don't approve it. So many of the bills have removing public hearings. And we've talked about that. The Work, Live, Ride bill, TOC 5390, I think, that would eliminate public hearings and within that footprint. And if you read through that bill, for example, the coordinator controls everything. So once if you don't opt in, you get deprioritized, which is what Francis just said. If you do opt in, you give up everything to the coordinator, which you might call a zoning czar, I guess. It's somebody who's a state official who doesn't live in your town, and they would decide many, many things. I did a word search on the bill. The word coordinator is mentioned 27 times. So even though it gives a nod to wetlands by saying the wetlands agency locally can help you figure out what the footprint should be of your TOD zone, it's the coordinator that will decide and decide every other thing once you opt in. So you pretty much lose all control. So, and it doesn't eliminate wetlands agency review if there is a wetland within the district. But I think wetlands should be exempt from the district altogether. And then there's another bill that gives the option of a town to eliminate all wetlands review completely. There's another bill that changes the standing to file a wetlands appeal. And I think there's another one. There's a study of the roundtable that's suggesting we get rid of local review, municipal review of any type of permitting. And there's other bills that say we want to start tracking all the residential building permits you produce every year. There's another bill that would reduce the oversight over septic and allow larger communal septic systems to get a lower level of review. I'm trying to see what else I listed here. There's so many. So the bottom line is you're finding a sort of a silencing of the public ability to be involved, whether it's having a hearing, anything that says as of right means no hearing. And so I know, and you know, as a zoning commissioner, the people who live near the land or on the land, they know best what goes on right there. People have been fighting wars over land for, you know, thousands of years. And they know what the value is, and they know how it could be harmed. They know what the natural resources are, the historic resources. So by eliminating the ability to have a hearing, that silences the public's ability to participate, to point things out. It also might sort of negate the ability of people to file 22A-19 environmental interventions, because those have to be filed into a proceeding. And if you eliminate a hearing, I'm not sure if there is a proceeding to intervene into. You would just have sort of rubber stamps at the front desk if it satisfies the requirements. And then I think it only gives lip service to wetlands. And when I see the negating of review of wetlands in several of the bills, or the increase or the heightened level of proving that you have standing to file an appeal, it basically is saying we don't care about wetlands. And that's not acceptable. Wetlands are a fragile resource. They're under attack. They provide a huge amount of eco services, as well as non-wetlands open space. Open space is not protected at all in any of the bills. So the TOD bill or TOC bill, whatever you want to call it, that does not prevent a wetlands agency from reviewing wetlands, but it doesn't do anything about open space that should be protected, but isn't already under some kind of an easement for protection. Land that's not wetlands. There's plenty of lands and historic resources that should be protected, but are not already protected, and that's not covered by any type of exemption or carve out or consideration that it shouldn't be in the zone. So the alarming trend is not paying attention to protecting our natural resources and not sort of elevating them to a higher level. One thing I'm in favor of is the study bill to study 8-30G. What's the bill number? 5333. And my hope with that bill is that they will completely exempt watershed towns that provide our drinking water for the whole state, because those towns carry the burden not only of probably having lower property taxes because they have low impact development and less commercial activity, but also any type of litigation costs when somebody tries to put an 8-30G in there. They go to court, and it's kind of like a double whammy for those towns, and they provide the drinking water for all of us. So the study should be done of 8-30G. 8-30G already pretty much allows a public hearing, but sort of takes away a lot of the zoning commission's ability to make decisions. And that's a conversation for another day. There's a lot of detail as to why it structurally harms the ability to really protect our resources.
Thanks, Catherine. Thank you. We have a few questions from the audience. Emily is asking, how do they numerically determine the total housing need for the state? And I'm assuming affordable housing.
Emily is probably referring to, I mean, Emily, there are a couple of ways it's done, right? So if you're talking about Connecticut General Statutes 8-30G, that is a 10% threshold of the total number of units, and the 10% can be public housing units for which a Section 8 or rental assistance program voucher is provided. It can be a USDA or CHAPA mortgage, or it could be deed restricted based upon income. So that is really not the housing need. That's just what 830G's threshold for the court being able to set aside zoning is, if you don't hit the 10% or have a moratorium. Under fair share, and keep in mind, so fair share originated in New Jersey in the 1970s. Since then, nobody else has adopted it. I think that speaks volumes. What's being proposed here in Connecticut is not the New Jersey model. It's far more punitive. And they don't even base the housing allocations on any study of need. They base it on 4 factors. One is, what are the income levels in the town? 2, what are the property values in the town, which those 2 highly correlate? 3, what is the poverty rate, which also correlates? And 4, what percentage of the housing stock is multifamily? So I'll show you where this breaks down. If you look at a town, say like Warren, Connecticut, very small town, largely New York weekender homes, there's not really any employment locally. These factors are very high income, because they're essentially weekend estates, low poverty rate, very high home values, almost no, possibly no multifamily. And the assumption of fair share is that there's therefore a demand for affordable housing because there's opportunity. The reality is, and I've had friends who grew up in Litchfield County, there is no opportunity there because these houses are vacant most of the time. So unless your opportunity is being a tenant farmer or domestic, you're not really going to get ahead. So the fair share model is somewhat broken on the face of it.
I have a point I want to add to that, if I
Yeah,
could.
please go ahead. Yeah.
I asked this last time, and I don't know if anyone has ever delved into this. Maybe Francis can answer this. I keep hearing the number 90,000 housing units are needed because not for homeless, because there's still about 3,000 or 3,500 homeless in Connecticut, but the 90,000 would be for people that are you know, cost burdened. But I've never been able to cite or source the raw data that shows that and how that calculation is done. Has that ever been vetted out or made current? That number's been bandied about for about 4 years now.
Yeah, so there are two things, Kathy. One is we've probably seen that we have about 90,000 unfilled job vacancies in Connecticut. And I think we're seeing these two numbers, 290,000s collide, right? And the argument is we need more housing so that we can attract workers so our businesses can hire. And if you don't have affordable housing, that will be a challenge for your workforce. The reality is that every state has job vacancies. In fact, 34 states have a higher rate of unfilled positions than we do. So everybody's in the same boat. The other 90,000 we also hear about households who are housing cost burdened. That, my understanding, having reviewed it, is based upon self-reporting to the census. So the Census Bureau asks people, what's your income level and how much are you spending on housing? And if you're in excess of 30%, then you're considered housing cost burdened.
And I would just add a couple of things to layer on that is we have to remember that part of that calculation of what your cost burden is property taxes. So we know that Connecticut has the second highest property taxes in the entire country. Number one being New Jersey, the one that has fair share, just as a side note. The second point that what gets added in is also your electric, your energy costs. So, and again, Connecticut is near the top of the pack because we have issues with policy in the state where we are not generating our own electricity. It's very expensive for us, and anybody who looks at their electric bills recognizes that. So that's part of what also factors in to it being very expensive to be here. So I just wanted to make sure everybody's aware of that as well.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to pause really quickly because Senator Gordon is on now. Good to see you live in video, Senator.
Yes, hello.
And we have gone over some many of the bills that we're tracking this session. But before we dive into more questions from the audience, do you want to provide an overview of some of the testimony that you've provided? And I know that you're unique because you are one of the few legislators that have real world experience as a P&Z commissioner. So appreciate
yes,
that.
that's true, and thank you, and I appreciate participating. These are issues I know well, having served 16 years in my own town, Woodstock's Planning and Zoning Commission, 15 as chair, and there's only a couple of us in the legislature who actually have that type of experience. So I do bring it whenever I go to hearings and testify. But as you've been talking about, there are bills before the legislature. I've done testimony publicly, but also working with legislators behind the scene with regards to them, and also lurking in the background is what's happening with fair share and that task force that's supposed to report back. And one of the things that I highlight is that we really got to get away from trying to force 830G onto towns, especially towns that can't make it work because they're small, rural, don't have infrastructure. That's most of the towns that I represent in Northeast Connecticut. And really try to partner better with the towns, but also making certain we're not doing anything that's going to punish the towns. And that's been my concern. That's one of the things I've been testifying about this legislative session is it's fine to let towns opt into certain types of programs, such as transit-oriented districts, but there are many towns that have no transit, let alone a transit-oriented district. And we don't want them to be penalized. And that is a concern, no matter what we may hear from some folks, there is that real concern. So we really need to get away from the stick approach, and we really need to get away from trying to pound a square peg in a round hole. And I believe firmly that if we just partner with the towns, a lot of them are doing great things that should count as affordability, not just the strict definitions of 830G for affordable, what's truly affordable in Connecticut. And that's just not housing, but it gets into many other things about why people choose to live here, build homes here, high cost of energy, high cost of living, taxes, many different things. And so it's a bigger type of undertaking. It shouldn't just be housing and assume that towns just need to start building more housing and the problem will be solved. It doesn't work that way. And quite frankly, if it were an easy fix, it would have been solved a long time ago, not just in Connecticut, but in many, many states.
Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate that. And good to see you. I do want to go back to the audience because we do have a few more questions. Cynthia from Bethel, she has a question. Why is the state so reluctant to count ADUs in in-law apartments as affordable housing? Who wants to take that?
I can take it if nobody else wants to. So, and this also, I think, touches on Todd's question where he says, what is affordable? Affordable in Greenwich is not the same as in Woodstock. Well, under state law, it is, right? So the national standard is affordable is no more than 30% of household income, which includes property taxes and utilities. Connecticut state law has a couple of definitions, but the one that's most commonly used is under section 8-30G. And a unit that costs no more than 30% of somebody earning the lesser of 80% of state or area median income. So the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development determines state median incomes and area median incomes. And we know they vary throughout the state. And then the state says, well, take 80% of that. So it's somebody who's making less than the median. If the housing costs no more than 30% of that 80%, then it's deemed affordable. Now, it's actually a little bit more complicated because the state then layers on top of that regulation an additional 15% takedown. So the 80% actually becomes more like 68%. So we have a somewhat unique definition of affordable in Connecticut. It's complicated. There's a lot of confusion over it sometimes.
You're on mute.
I'm on mute. I haven't figured that one out after 4 years. I want to go to Tim's question because this is just going back to the as of right lack of public hearings. Bethel's charter mandates that every elected and appointed board must include public input as an agenda item for regular meetings. Can a state statute void that charter requirement? I'm assuming if any of these bills are passed and some of these developments could be as of right, assuming that that would void the public hearing process. Is that possible?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yes, I would say absolutely, because the way you have to look at it is that the ability for a municipality to do land use zoning doesn't emanate from the municipality. It actually emanates from the state, which ultimately emanates from the federal government and its enabling acts way back, I think in the 20s, it was pushed out. So yes, it can very much so. And that's one of the things I've argued against is it's one thing to say as of right and not have public hearings, but you should leave things up to common sense for the municipalities to decide. I can tell you what we did in Woodstock is there were times we didn't need public hearings, but we always welcomed public input. But there were times it was very clear we needed public hearings. So you don't want to lose that flexibility. And you also don't want to divorce people from what's happening in their own towns and letting them weigh in when they want and let the planning and zoning commissions then sort that through. So one has to be careful with how much one goes towards as of right and start limiting public input. I'm concerned that there is that real effort, especially when we looked at some of the folks who are advocating fair share. and having written articles that public input sometimes is bad. And that's not true. I've always found it very, very helpful knowing what people in the town want, don't want, questions, concerns. You make informed decisions that way.
Totally agree. As a P&Z commissioner myself, we rely often on the public to provide us really compelling information that we would not ordinarily know. So agree with that. Now, I just want to go back to 830G because I know many folks in the audience have had concerns about it. Why does there seem, I mean, because we see the fair share, we see these other, bills that would, allegedly create affordable housing. Why are we just not fixing the original bill or the original regulation that we have, like 830G? Because it has not created the affordability that it did set out to do, 35 years ago now. Why the reluctance?
I think that there's just this feeling that it has created some affordable. So they sort of hang their hat on, well, but there has been development as a result of it. What we've been thinking a lot about is, and we've discussed, is that Massachusetts has a version of 830G called 40B. And their version of it, and Francis could definitely explain this better than I can, but I think their version basically it doesn't override. So in the version that we have here in Connecticut, you can override zoning for height, density, setbacks, and the version that exists in Massachusetts allows you to, it has to consider the environment and where the development is occurring, so it has to fit in with what's already existing. And I think that if we had a model that was not as onerous as it currently is and allowed for that, I think you might see less litigation, because it's not just such a glaring high density all the way to the edge of your postage stamp property, right to the perimeters sort of development. And I think that that's something that really should be considered, but I think everybody feels like it's the third rail, that they don't want to go there unless there's some other thing that can be done. And I would echo as well that, there is a moratorium process, and a while ago it was conceived that might be a good way to get others more engaged with developing, and just to seek some relief from 830G. And the reality is only 11 towns in Connecticut have ever achieved a moratorium. Of those, 6 had been denied and then had to wait a period of 6 months to almost a year and then get approved. So it seems like there's this not as cooperative a process, or not as a collaborative of a process that currently exists. And I will say I was a little heartened by some of the bills that came out this year that talked about some other ideas that might actually spur development, like middle housing. The idea that you could do some middle housing and that you might be able to get some HUE points. That's housing unit equivalents. That's how you get a moratorium. They count in a certain number of points depending on what you build. So I think there are some opportunities to, maybe if we really did want to try a true collaborative carrot approach, I would suggest embracing the idea of giving HUE points for middle housing, which is harder to build, because a lot of towns, when they're facing down the gun of a 830G, they're going to keep building the affordable part, and we need a middle housing as well. Would be great to have as well, but it's not going to be prioritized when you have all these other issues that you're dealing with as well.
Thank you. Kathy, anything you want to add?
Yeah, so just in case anyone's not that familiar, 8-30G incentivizes massive out-of-scale developments, because the developer has to, in order to get basically a free ride from all zoning regulations, none of them apply at all. Height, setback, parking, coverage, whatever, don't apply. Our zoning regs we're not allowed to use at all when there's an 8-30G. But to get that free ride through zoning and also get special treatment in court as well, they have to give 30% as affordable. So that's why you see the massive out-of-scale developments that don't fit into the neighborhood. That's the problem right there, the massive scale. I find that it's harmful in a few ways. First of all, when you go to court, if your town's ratio isn't going up, and by ratio, I don't mean approaching moratorium, I mean your ratio of affordable housing as defined in 8-30G not naturally occurring affordable housing, divided by the total housing units in your town. That can fluctuate up or down because it includes things like Section 8 tenant assistance and the use by individuals of CHASPA for down payment on mortgages, and we can't control that. So it could actually go down even if you're adding affordable units every year. So that gets used in court, and judges hear that and they see, oh, your ratio hasn't gone up. You're supposed to be at 10%. Well, 10% is not really supposed to be a target, but it's treated like a target. 10% is really the amount of that ratio of affordable to total housing that makes a town exempt. And the percentage of towns that have been exempt from when the law was passed 35 years ago to today is pretty much static. The same towns that had 10% affordable 35 years ago still have it now, and there's been virtually no change. It might have gone down even a little bit. And that's because when towns had the affordable housing back then, they were the big cities that needed it, and that's where it was put. So towns, however, are penalized and kind of looked poorly on when they're not moving towards the 10%. I was told yesterday at an affordable housing forum in my town that in my lifetime, my town will never get to 10%. It's a virtual mathematical impossibility. So it's really unfair to judge towns, but that ratio seems to be used not just in 8-30G, but whenever one talks about affordable housing to begin with, they ignore naturally occurring affordable housing. It's completely ignored. It's not part of the calculation for all of these discussions.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. I do want to go back to the audience because we have several more questions. Colin, I find it frustrating that the solutions proposed in Hartford are only focused on increasing housing supply and density. Why is there no appetite to even acknowledge that a core issue in our housing crisis is poverty and the lack of opportunity that so many face in our state cities? Anyone want to take that?
I'll take a stab at that because I've been giving testimony and talking about this in the legislature. One of the problems is that if you're focusing only on housing and missing the overall aspect of what makes things truly the affordability here in Connecticut, then you're really not going to solve the problem. Most towns can't build lots of housing. They just don't, small towns just don't have the infrastructure at all to do it. So if we're not looking at where we are from a public safety point of view, that gets into where there's crime, where there isn't crime, job opportunities, how you get to those jobs with regards to is there public transportation or not for those people who need public transportation, where we are with overall being able to afford living in Connecticut when you look at people who are low income, but also those who meet the United Way's ALICE criteria, which are the folks who are asset limited and income constrained, but they're actually working. Those don't really get much into the metrics when we talk about affordable housing, and that's a shame because it's one thing to build affordable housing, but then you actually have to be able to live where that is and find a job and get to the job, take care of your kids, childcare, all these things. And that's why I argue it's not a simple fix, and no matter what the state is trying to mandate from above onto the municipalities, it hasn't worked and it won't work unless we are realistic in trying to address many of these other things. And that really gets into redefining affordable housing and reworking how we partner with the towns. And it's a complicated issue, but there's a lot of moving parts, and it's not only or solely just housing. And that's part of the mistake that some people, I believe, in government and the legislature make, which is, oh, you need X amount of housing, we'll just build it, or required to be built and problem solved. And be nice if it worked that way, but that's not the way it is in the real world. And we're not alone in Connecticut. A lot of states are facing this just like we are.
Right.
And I would add that if we have a lot of anti-business policies, things that we push down on even very small businesses that even have 1 or 2 employees. There's, in a lot of places, if you're required to do certain benefit packages and things, you have to have a certain number of employees to to run that through, but we seem to ignore that impact on a small business owner. And I think that when you consider that, and you consider that our energy costs are some of the highest, it's hard to imagine a lot of companies, as they're doing the numbers and trying to figure out where they should go to create a new business, when we're not putting together a good policy in our state to try to tackle that issue. So because I've often said that it's an unsustainable way to just approach this from housing. Really, the only way to improve affordability is by improving the economics of a state, and that's where you can really see, because you can see by the population where it's grown. It's in southwestern Connecticut is where the population's grown, because we benefit from New York metro area, and we have so many of our residents that commute to New York, to the metro New York area to work. But in other parts of the state, they've had stagnant or declining population because of that lack of opportunity and businesses that are leaving our state. So I think that those are all critical issues, and that's the true way to improve affordability, is to really provide more opportunity, have more businesses want to come here, and have a vibrant economy.
Yeah, and if I, Maria, you're absolutely right. I mean, there's what makes housing affordable, unaffordable is not just the cost of the housing, it's how much money a household has. But when we're looking at, I saw a question from Brian about what is the motivation on the part of the bill's authors in eliminating zoning when zoning is an integral element of urban planning. In response to your question, there's been, I would characterize it as a national movement in the last couple of years against zoning. I think there has been some basis for that, but also some misunderstanding and frankly, an overstatement of what zoning can achieve. If you look at the National Association of Home Builders, they point out, yes, regulatory costs, which include zoning, can substantially increase housing costs, but those also include state building codes, state health codes, fire codes. If you look at their fact sheets on changes to the building code, Connecticut pat itself on the back for being one of the first states to adopt the new International Residential Code, which increased the cost of housing by $10,000 to $20,000 for every unit. We have dramatically jacked up housing prices by adopting tighter and tighter and tighter building codes. We also, when you look at housing costs, we're tending to forget the cost of financing with the increase in interest rates that has gone dramatically up. We are neglecting to include the cost of materials, which have gone dramatically up. And also the cost of labor. And Connecticut has, by some measures, the oldest building trades workforce in the country. And the state puts lots of obstacles in the way to more people joining that workforce. So if we're trying to solve housing costs on the back of zoning, we're going to fail. We can blow up zoning and housing will still not be affordable because so many other issues stand in the way. It really has to be a comprehensive solution. I think we have some enlightened legislators. I would like to call out some of our House Majority Leader Jason Rojas has created an affordable housing roundtable on which I'm honored to sit. And the conversation has been fantastic because we've talked about zoning, but we've talked about the panoply of issues out there that are driving housing costs. We can't solve this all with one slice of the pie. We've got to look at the entire pie.
That actually goes to my next question. You kind of hit on it, Francis, is there just seems to be a school of thought in Hartford, not by all, certainly, that we have to have a kind of one size fits all approach. But then there are these other people like us fighting for local control. How come there can't be like a middle ground or some kind of collaboration? I know the Majority Leaders Roundtable has been great and has done a lot of fantastic work. You don't have to answer this question, but anyone else, or you certainly can take it. But I just feel like we need more collaboration, and we just seem to be just fighting each other, which isn't healthy. Doesn't really result in what we need.
I would just add one thing. I watched there's a couple of them that I want to see, but there was one that had the Nevada treasurer on, and there were questions that were posed about what Nevada is doing to help with their needs for affordable housing. And it really kind of hit home, no pun intended, well, maybe a little bit with me, that, we're looking at it from, it is a need. And it is a need that the state is committed to, and that's what he had said. And then he also said that because the question came up from Senator Duff was, well, and what have you done for zoning? Like, what kind of zoning reforms have you tried to put in place? And he seemed a little confused by that questioning, because he said, well, we're not focused on that. We're focused on making sure that those people who are those towns and municipalities and regions that are interested in economic growth and development, that we're helping support them, helping create it where they're motivated to do so. And I think that sort of, it just spoke to me that maybe that's where we need to go, that they say, and he understood that those who are closest to the zoning issues, the ones in those local communities, understand best the mechanics of what can and can't be done and where it's best to do it, as opposed to someone out in who's legislative, who is theoretical on it, but not really understanding the minutia of what is impacting individuals in these communities. And that can vary from town to town. So I think that was a great discussion. And I hope that they take some of that to heart, because I think more collaboration is really welcome here. And I think all of our towns would really welcome that.
If I can just quickly follow on that. Yes, and that's one of the things I've advocated for years and continue to advocate now as a senator in the legislature, is we should be getting away from some of these political agendas, but also there's a lot of misunderstanding that people have who don't understand land use zoning, what zoning really is, what it can, but especially what it can't do. And when I've been following the majority leaders roundtable discussions, very interesting, and having discussions with legislators, that when you really try to educate folks about what you're trying to do, it gets to what Francis said, and Maria, what you said is, you got to look at the overall picture. And if you just assume that you're going to mandate housing and magically it's going to work, or that just changing zoning or the state taking over zoning will work, that doesn't work either. So you have to get away from that mentality and really look at partnering and seeing what can we do for all these things. And one of the things that's frustrating is we talk about housing in the legislature, we're separately talking about workforce development, we're talking about what we do with the tax structure, what we do with all sorts of things for public transportation. But a lot of times it's in silos, and trying to get them to really connect better. That's actually how you can really bring better things apart, the opportunities, things like that for people. And then the towns can be given better help and resources to do what they would like to do, or realistically they can do, and understanding what works in the smallest town that I represent is Union, 781 people. It's more forest than there are people in that town. Beautiful town. You can't build a lot of affordable housing there. It has no realistic way of doing it. Yet you're trying to force them to do that, compared to what happens, say, in the suburbs around Hartford or around New Haven. And you have to get away from that mentality that Connecticut's small and we can make it all work by these set of rules. Really, that's not the reality on the ground, and it's continuing to educate people. I actually have been happy to see some folks, when I talk with them about this, want to really delve into it more, who really just haven't dealt with zoning because that's just not their cup of tea, and they don't have a background in it. But it's continuing to educate people.
Yeah, I do. We have a few more questions. I know we're getting close to time. Hope we can go a few more minutes because we did start a little late.
But there are a couple of comments about giving a list of bill numbers with pros and cons. I think our group has done that.
Yeah, Kathy, we'll be distributing more content this week on bills, and we'll get that out to folks.
We actually have started to update our website, so CT169Strong.org. If you scroll down on the front page, you will see a list of bills. We're doing still a few more little tweaks. There's maybe 2 more bills that need to get in there, so please forgive us if we do a little zhuzhing and pushing some stuff around on there, but it is up there, so the bills of concern that we have right now. And we do have 4 bills that we are concerned about for this hearing, and we're going to be sending out an email blast on those bills, which are HB 5474, SB 416, HB 5473, and HB 5475. And so we'll be sending that out later today. It's just the numbers are so close to each other, and so it can get confusing. But these are bills that one of them is talking about. Hold on a minute here. So commercial property, as Barry had mentioned, the concerns, we have concerns about commercial property being swapped for residential use, and allowing them to have as of right development on top of it. So we do think about that. We think about the fact that, as a community, if you are eliminating your commercial base, those burdens then can fall upon your residential taxpayers. And so those towns like mine that has very little commercial and is mostly residential, we are much more at the mercy of the volatility of a real estate market. So those are concerns that you want to make sure that if you are developing, that there is mixed use included, that there's other opportunities and ways to enhance properties that are being repurposed. So that's one of them. That's SB 416. And then there was another one here that talked about, a 575, had a number of different that took away rights of people to appeal when there's some issues with the zoning near their homes, but not directly abutting. It also wanted to take away inland wetlands review, and then they also wanted to do a study of all the properties in the state. The state wants to also do it, which is good, to take a look at all the properties that are owned by the state. So that's one of those. So there's those 4 bills. We'll be sending out an email on those 4 bills. That hearing is on the 13th. You can sign up until Tuesday to speak at the hearing, and you can submit testimony. You don't have to speak, but we welcome and encourage everybody to get involved and to submit testimony on all of these bills.
Yeah, great. All right, one more question, I promise. Housing advocates suggest flooding Connecticut with housing supply would lower the cost. Would deflating housing costs be a good thing? And are there any unintended consequences?
I think we'd all take a stab at that, right?
Yeah.
So flooding the state with housing, somebody's going to have to pay for that housing, right? So there will be an opportunity cost to paying for that housing, especially if that housing is beyond what the market will demand, right? So if we want to get homes to the point where they are affordable, given the cost of lending, materials, labor, land, all of these things, to get them to a price that a builder can make a reasonable profit off of, much of the time, that is going to be below break even, right? The builder will not make a profit. So the only way those homes will get built is if they're subsidized. And so the first question is, who's going to pay for it all? And if we look at the fair share model, which is not really market-based, but if we look at that, that's tens of billions of dollars. And of course, when there's an opportunity cost, what are we going to sacrifice for that? Is it going to come off the backs of working families, or are we going to shortchange our schools? Or are we going to add to the state's credit card? Now, if we did flood the market, there are some examples of when the market was flooded. Not so much in a slow-growing state like Connecticut, but if you look back at 2008, the market nationwide was flooded due to overbuilding. And we all know what happened. It plunged the nation into a huge recession. Thankfully, we avoided a depression, but it had a lasting impact on the housing market. The real estate industry was demolished for about a decade. And it's only been recently that we've seen the building workforce crawl back out of it. So the solution to shortages is not an overabundance. The solution we should see is to avoid this boom and bust, because who benefits from boom and bust? Big banks do. Who hurts? Families. The correct thing to do is try to stabilize the housing market so it grows at a steady, sustainable rate, rather than flood it and then everything implode, and then a decade or 15 years later, it comes back and then it implodes again.
I would add, because this is something that I've testified on a couple of times, is the other issue here is the voucher system. There is a support net that's out there, and the studies that have, or I should say the reporting by Jackie Robb Thomas, where she said that over 50% of the housing vouchers are not being used. So that's a concern. And then I think that, you know, there's an issue with portability there. There's an issue with, you know, how the wait lists are managed. And I think that this is one of those tougher issues that these larger city legislators just don't have the stomach to actually address head on. So they're more than willing to hold on to their vouchers and prefer to just have a housing authority built to let a New Haven housing authority to build anywhere else instead and use their vouchers to do that rather than allocating vouchers throughout the state, rather than, you know, hitting them into areas where the costs are higher and that maybe they need more assistance in areas like southwestern Connecticut, where you have higher income earners and higher property values as a result, which makes it that much harder to live in this area. So I think that there has to be a more comprehensive view and a real honest approach and start looking at tackling some of these issues a little bit more directly than just around the margins of doing a little study on how to like counsel people on where they might want to live, or, you know, things like that, which we're seeing these bills just kind of dip a toe in the water, but that's about it. So, you know, and that's a factor, because if you put people on vouchers and they have the vouchers and they can find housing throughout the state, that's a great opportunity. It's also an opportunity then to maybe get people out of shelters. And then it's also an opportunity to get people who are homeless into the shelters. So everything is interrelated, and all of it can have an impact on each of these other items. So I think it's important that we start addressing these issues head on.
Thank you. Before we close, Kathy or Jeff, do you have anything else you want to add?
I just want to add real quick, if I could, is keep in mind, this is a short legislative session. We are around a third of the way done with it, and we're supposed to be done on May 8th, and that's a hard stop. Like Cinderella, midnight, suddenly, everything turns into a pumpkin. So things are happening at a very fast pace. Pay attention to what's going on. Very much let your voice be heard. If you can't make a public hearing, you can't send in testimony, let your state senator, let your state rep know what you think. If this isn't an issue that's on their radar screen right now, then make certain it is, because once things come out of committee, which is going to happen pretty soon, the deadlines are coming up, then it gets out to the House and the Senate, and things will start happening, especially in the middle of the night when things happen that way. So I'm hopeful we're not going to rush through things and try to really cram a lot into a short time frame. And I hope we can continue this discussion even into the next session to really think this through. But I just want to warn people, we don't have a lot of time as far as some of the things trying to be done. And so be vigilant and make your voices be heard, especially if you think something is not going the right way or being rushed. I have the advantage of trying to advocate for these things on the inside, but public input, public pressure really does matter. So if you haven't, let your voice be heard.
Thank you. And Jeff, thank you for your great advocacy in Hartford on our behalf. So really appreciate you and everything you bring to the table. Kathy, I will let you have the final word.
Yeah. So any green people out there, I've been a green person as a lawyer for 25 years. So I'm going to, one of the questions here from Dana in Easton wants to know if we can if I can do a little synopsis. I'm going to try to do that. I know we have little one-page blurbs that we're writing on each, that CT169 is on each of the bills. I'll try to do just a green component of that. If anybody just wants to write a green letter covering all the bills, I think that's important. I think they have to know that you have to have all stakeholders involved, and you can't ignore environmental protection, not in this era of climate change.
Great, thank you. And I did lie, little fib. I did one more person who's making a special cameo, Julie Camerata. Many of you in our audience know that we did hire Julie as a lobbyist, a part-time lobbyist, just so we can have ears and eyes on the ground in Hartford. Julie, do you want to make a few remarks about the session?
Yes, I'm glad I finally got the connection worked out. So I think we're seeing a lot of clash with fundamental philosophies there that in across committees. It's not just this particular issue. And I would say there's kind of this push between whether we're moving fast enough or to quote unquote transform things. And I think that's kind of the vision behind those that are pushing this particular issue, is that centralizing for speed is better. And if you believe in that local control and being part of a community and caring about the future of a community, you really need to speak up, because I think the louder voices in there are for centralization and demanding quicker results. And as many times as Francis kind of alluded to, and Senator Gordon a couple of times, it's almost like, damn, the unintended consequences. And that's what I'm really, really worried about. And I think those pieces need to be hammered out a little bit, because the unintended consequences here are enormous. I think the statistic is something like the vast majority of Americans have 90% or more of their wealth tied up into their homes. And that kind of connection to your community, we've always believed, produces a community you want to stay in, people multi-generational even. And by pushing to try to make things transformational, I think we're just going to have a lot of unintended consequences. So with regard to strategy, please do everything you can to be heard. It's extremely important that you speak up, because those folks that want things to move more quickly have slogans, have form letters, have people that they can get to show up and wait and testify. And if we don't have that same showing, it sends kind of the message that it's okay to just kind of push these things through. And I think it's really, really important that we let our legislators know that there are unintended consequences, that we're here and we want to work through those with the state in a partnership, but to please kind of slow the train down on trying to undermine local control, or slow down or speed up local control, speed up results. You really just need to be heard. They have basically volunteers. They have people that are paid to work for the organization in much larger numbers. So if the average person doesn't stand up and stay in touch with their legislator, you may regret it.
We will close with that message. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for everybody's attention on this Sunday night. And we will be continuing the conversation. So stay tuned. To stay abreast of housing, zoning, and 8-30G bills in Hartford, please visit our website at CT169Strong.org. A link is provided in the description to this video. Please support our efforts on behalf of your neighborhood and to preserve local control of zoning. Thank you.